The carnivore diet has been gaining attention as a highly specialized way of eating. It primarily consists of animal-based foods.
Every single form of life has a specific set of nutritional requirements. Diet is very species specific. Plants have a unique defense structure. North American water hemlock is the most poisonous plant in North America. Just eating high-fat, meat-based diet and just drinking water is optimal for human health. We have receptors in our stomach that track up the vagus nerve to our brain.
Listen to your body.
Yeah.
If you're not active, you have to adjust.
Our brain is always running on ketones to some degree. Ketones require 1 NAD plus to make 2 acetyl-CoA. And as an athlete, that's your body is your machine. That you get a massive benefit by being ketogenic. It's a whole food diet approach.
In each episode, we dwell into the realms of wellness, exploring the latest trends, expert advice, and practical tips to help lead you a happy, healthier life. We aim to bring a broader perspective to our American audience on issues that impact your daily life by interviewing guests from the US and around the world. From nutrition and fitness to mental well-being and beyond, we're here to empower you with knowledge and inspiration. So whether you're looking to boost your energy, revamp your diet, or simply trying to find a balance in your lifestyle, you're at the right place. Join us as we embark on a journey towards a better, brighter you. I'm your host, Dr. Amir Khan, and together let's unlock the secrets to living life to its fullest. The carnivore diet has been gaining attention as a highly specialized way of eating. It challenges the conventional dietary norms. It primarily consists of animal-based foods, focusing on meat, fish, eggs, and some dairy, while completely eliminating the plant-based foods like fruits, vegetable, grains, and legumes. Advocates of the diet often cite its potential benefits for weight loss, inflammation reduction, and even management of chronic condition, claiming it aligns with how humans may have eaten ancestrally. However, it's a topic that sparks debate among health professionals and nutritionists regarding its long-term effects and nutrition advocacy. Today, we're diving into this fascinating subject with an expert who has extensively studied and experienced the carnivore diet firsthand. Welcome to another episode of Khan Klinics, powered by the health section of AMT. I'm your host, Dr. Amir Khan. Our today's guest is Dr. Anthony Chaffee. He is an accomplished American medical doctor, a neurosurgical registrar in Australia, with over 20 years of research experience focused on nutrition, its impact, and health performance. He studied molecular and cellular biology with a minor in chemistry. He earned his MD from the Royal College of Surgeons, and alongside his medical career, Dr. Anthony boasts an impressive athletic background, having been All-American rugby player, a professional athlete in England and the United States, and a trained MMA fighter at the AMC Kickboxing in Kirkland, Washington. In addition to his medical and athletic pursuits, Dr. Chaffee has medical significant contribution as a volunteer in refugee camp in Bangladesh, providing care to the survivors of the 2017 genocide in Burma as well. He has worked extensively looking into conventional dietary wisdom and has earned his recognition across health podcasts and other media platforms as well. We're thrilled to have him. Dr. Anthony, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Let's dive right into our first question. Tell us, what's your concept about the carnivore diet, your definition, and how do you work with it?
Well, I think that it is, as you alluded to earlier, what we've been eating ancestrally, and so what we're most biologically adapted and capable of eating. There are various different diets in the wild. Every single form of life has a specific set of nutritional requirements and certain chemicals that will do greater or lesser harm against them. So diet is very species specific. And if you look at our species, as long as humans have been humans, we have predominantly been eating meat, and certainly during certain eras, such as the ice ages, in the Arctic Circle, really there wasn't anything else to eat. We know that humans were living in the Arctic Circle during the ice ages and thriving there. You can't do anything but thrive in an ice age if you survive. You either thrive or you die. And we not only thrived, but we became the most dominant species that has ever walked the earth. And we know that people crossed the land bridge by foot across from Asia to North America, over the ice bridge in the Arctic Circle during the Ice Age. So if we weren't able to do extremely well eating exclusively high-fat meat, we were hunting the megafauna. People think that we may have hunted them to extinction, things like the woolly mammoths. I think there may have been an extinction event as well that actually changed things up for us as well as those animals. But in either case, I think that is what we're best adapted for. Now, you don't need to be adapted to eat meat as an animal, because all animals are trying to get nutrition to build and maintain meat. Basically, we're all made out of meat. And so they need to get proteins, fats, and those sorts of nutrients. And they need to stay away from things that cause harm. And this is why only certain animals are specially adapted to being able to turn plant tissue into animal tissue. It's very, very different forms of life. And plants have a unique defense structure because they're stationary. They can't run away or fight back like an animal can. Animals have kinetic defenses. Plants don't. And so spikes, things like that, but they can't move. And so their main defense is chemical in nature. So we have classified, categorized, and named nearly 1 million defensive chemicals that plants make throughout the entire plant kingdom and fungus kingdom. And these are largely deadly. They can kill you. They can completely disrupt your hormonal system, your metabolic system, and cause all sorts of harm. For instance, the North American water hemlock is the most poisonous plant in North America. Even half a leaf can kill an adult, and they're not very big leaves. And they do that by blocking the GABA receptor in the brain and causing intractable seizures. So within a minute or two, you die of intractable seizures that you cannot stop because the GABA receptors are blocked. And so this is just one way that plants defend themselves. So I think that it's incumbent upon us when we're trying to discuss nutrition is to look at what we're inherently biologically adapted for, and what we've been exposed to the longest is what we're going to be most biologically adapted to. This is immutable law of adaptation in biology. And so we can do extremely well on meat. We know that because of the ice ages. We know that because of the Inuit and the Maasai and the Nanette and others, Australian Aboriginals and Native Americans in the Great Plains who are largely carnivorous. So we know we can get everything we need in the proportion that we need it. We also know that plants are largely toxic. And so of the 400,000 species of plants in the world that we know of, nearly every single one will kill us. And of the ones that don't kill us, that are edible, these aren't just completely safe. They do have toxins. It's just we have a better ability to break down some of these toxins and defend ourselves against them. So we can subsist on some plant matter. We have, through technology, broadened that range of plants that we're capable of eating. Through cooking, you can denature some things, some of the plant toxins called lectins and other such chemicals. Through fermentation, that's a major one. There are processes called nixtamalization. You're crushing corn in with lye, for instance, and then you can mix it with clay or ash or all these different sorts of materials that can soak in some of these toxins and make it safer for humans to eat. So we figured that out over the last 10, 15,000 years because we've had to since the megafauna died out and had the advent of the agricultural revolution. But that doesn't mean that this is our optimal diet. It certainly isn't our biologically adapted diet. or else we would not have to cook them. We would not have to ferment them. We would not have to go through nixtamalization. The fact that we have to do that shows very clearly that we're not biologically set up to do it ourselves, because we don't have the enzymes and biological ability to do that. So I think that a carnivore diet is really just a proper human diet. It's just what humans are meant to eat. Just like a lion is meant to eat something, a giraffe is meant to eat something else. And we need to recognize what that is. I think the best evidence shows that that is a carnivorous diet for us. And we can include some plants, especially through technology. We can make that a bit more doable. But I think inherently, just eating high-fat, meat-based diet and just drinking water is optimal for human health.
That's a very good point, and thank you for explaining that, Dr. Anthony. My counter question to that would be, in the last 100 or 200 years, men and women have, we've been, as a society, been evolving, and we've been less active, definitely compared to what we were 200, 400, and you're talking about 1,000 years ago. First of all, would that have an impact? And we all agree it does have an impact on how we've been behaving, what we're doing. And if it does, eating a high fat, high protein diet, would we not have to modify or adjust to that? So how do we incorporate those changes into our lifestyles and stuff?
I suppose you would adjust to them in the same way that an animal in the zoo would adjust to them. You just wouldn't need as much energy. So a lion still needs a carnivorous diet. In the zoo, zebras need what they eat, giraffes need what they eat, and and they eat different things as well, because the plants that those herbivores eat are very different. Like herbivores, even herbivores have to eat very specific plants, or those plants can kill them as well. We know this in veterinary medicine. There are a whole list of diseases that are caused directly by eating the wrong plant. So when you change your environment and you're in a more sedentary lifestyle, like in a zoo, which is probably about as much exercise as most humans get, sitting in a very enclosed space and not, just sitting at a desk and driving home and things like that, they just don't need as much nutrition. They don't need as much energy. And so they don't eat as much. And when you're eating your naturally evolved diet, your biologically appropriate diet, you should be able to have internal cues that tell you that. And we do see that when people adopt a carnivorous diet, their body tells them how much to eat. I notice this myself. I notice this in my patients, that when I'm more active, when I'm working out, when I'm lifting weights, when I'm back playing rugby, my body simply requires more food. So I will nearly double the amount of food I just naturally want to eat. If I'm sedentary and relaxed and just going to and from the hospital, I may eat, call it 2 pounds of ribeye steak. That's sort of an average day for me on a sedentary day. When I'm more active and I'm going to the gym regularly and training, that could easily be 3 to 4 pounds of ribeye. My body will tell me that. I eat until satiety. I eat until that meat stops tasting good, because we actually have feedback on our taste. We have receptors in our stomach that track up the vagus nerve to our brain and actually look at the macros and micros that are sitting in our stomach. It's not just the stretch receptors releasing leptin, like some people have, like we've said since the 80s. We actually our bodies are much more sophisticated than that. And so when you have a lot of nutrients in your stomach, and fat is very satiating because it's a nutrient that your body requires, so is protein. So you're eating these sorts of things are very satiating because your body can track those nutrients. That goes to your brain, and then you get a softening of that positive feedback when you eat. And so you eat that steak. At first, it tastes amazing because you're hungry and your body wants those nutrients. But as you keep going, the taste dampens down, and eventually get to a point where it doesn't actually taste good. It tastes sort of like cardboard. Even though it's the same piece of meat cooked at the same time in the same conditions, it's still warm. And if it's a 1-to-1 chemical response, it should taste amazing the entire way through, but it doesn't. And so you can intuitively stop eating. And when you need more, your body will tell you need more. When people have excess weight, your body just won't want as much food coming in. I noticed that when I went down to a very stable, low body fat percentage, there was a day that I just woke up and I just needed about twice as much as what I was eating, because my body needed to maintain that. It wasn't going to be accessing my fat stores because it wanted that for actual storage. And so I noticed that in my patients as well. We see this in the wild. People say that, well, animals in the wild, they don't get obese because it's all about the scarcity of resources. Well, in some places that it is. In some places, animals are really fighting and combating for resources. In other places, they aren't. They have an abundance of resources. And so you should, if that were true, then you should see in those populations periods of obesity in certain animals. Koalas, this is a perfect example because they sit in their tree, which is their food source, the eucalyptus tree. They don't have any natural predators. They don't really have to go very far. They're just sitting there eating their fill. And yet you don't see some koalas that don't have any natural willpower and just obese and like, oh, that's William. He's just doesn't know how to control himself. They all look basically the same. Good luck, telling the difference between two koalas. And, they just sit in their food source eating all day, and yet their body knows exactly when to stop. And so if we're doing that and we're in a sedentary motion like we are now, that's fine. Even the Maasai, we looked at this in the 80s, and they said these people looked like Olympic athletes. They had a 50-inch vertical. They could just run for miles without getting tired. And they thought that these were very, very fit. There's like Olympic level sort of athletes. And they said, well, they must just be, but they're eating this horrible heart disease sort of food. They're eating all this fat and drinking all this whole milk and eating this meat. It must be because of their exercise. They must have this really high exercise that they go through every day. And they studied them. And in fact, they found that they were actually only 1.6 times more active than the average sedentary American in the 1980s. And certainly at the time, and certainly now, people look at that as the base of sedentary lifestyle. So, yeah.
So you're saying basically, here, listen to your body.
Yeah.
If you're not active, you have to adjust. It doesn't matter. It's the amount that you're eating. You have to adjust. It's not about the ingredients or what you're taking. You still need that same organic meat or that quantity that is there.
Correct. Yeah.
I want to hear from you, Dr. Anthony. Give us a bit of insight about how do you think the carnivore diet helps mental clarity and cognitive function? Share us some research that you know of or you like to share with our audience, and some of it share with your patients and your followers.
Yeah, well, certainly. So as far as mental clarity is concerned, that's going to be from a couple of different things. One, you're going to be removing things that could potentially be causing brain fog, inflammation, neuroinflammation. There's a lot of things that can potentially cause neuroinflammation that exist in plants, seed oils, linoleic acid. And there's a book called Grain Brain, where they talk about this entire processes of how grains, carbohydrates, etc., can actually slow down the cognitive function in your brain, and it slows you down. You also get highs and lows in your blood sugar levels. You get a dip in your blood sugar when you're eating carbohydrates. You get this spike, but then you get what's called reactive hypoglycemia, for people who haven't heard of that, where your insulin goes up and stays up, and then your blood sugar then comes down too low. And because your insulin is up, now you can't mobilize your fat energy and make more glucose, but also make ketones. Ketones are the other side of that equation. It's very important to have ketones. It's taught in biochemistry, etc., at least when I was going through, that our brain in a fed state, which is now being called a carbohydrate-driven state, is we run on glucose for our brain. And because we called that our fed state and our natural state, that was assumed, well, that's our natural state, that's our primary metabolic state, therefore glucose is our primary energy source for our brain. But that isn't quite true. I was even taught this over 20 years ago in biochemistry, that our brain is always running on ketones to some degree. Any amount of ketones that are available in your body, your brain is running on those ketones, at least 2/3 of your brain anyway, some just like glucose. Any amount of ketones available, your brain will be using those ketones first, and then the rest of the glucose. And then when you switch to a ketogenic or so-called fasting metabolism, as it was called then you're predominantly, if not exclusively, running on ketones, at least for those areas of your brain. And that was explained to me by my biochemistry professor as saying, like, well, you don't want to have a drop off and going from glucose to ketones. So when you're going to the starvation state, you want to be at least primed with the ketones. But that doesn't explain the fact that you make blood sugar when you're in ketosis, when you're in a fasting state. So your blood sugar is completely normal that entire time. And yet your brain's just running on the ketones. So even in an abundance of glucose and an abundance of ketones, 2/3 of your brain will only run on ketones, even though there's enough glucose available. So that's a preference. So I would call that our primary energy source for our brain, at least that part of our brain. And so when your brain runs on ketones, it does seem to work better. Ketones also cross the blood-brain barrier and reconstitute into fatty acids, which can help grow and build the physical structures of your brain. This is why children are in ketosis. Very easy for kids to be in ketosis because they need to be in ketosis. Babies in the womb are in ketosis. Babies who are breastfeeding, even though milk has lactose, are in ketosis. And they will remain in ketosis if you don't overwhelm them with sugary, starchy foods as well. And since the agricultural revolution, our brains have actually reduced in size by 11% for adult men and 17% for adult women. And I think that's largely because of the inherent reduction in development that we see with starchy foods, especially when you're supposed to be in ketosis, because that didn't take hundreds or thousands of years to decline. Our brains were actually exponentially increasing. And then about 10, 15,000 years ago, it just sharp decline down by 11 to 17%. And so I think that's a major bonus as well. So some of the research on this we see in elderly adults with Alzheimer's, for instance. There was a large study, a randomized control trial looking at patients with Alzheimer's, and they put them on a high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diet. And they found that that was a better treatment for active Alzheimer's than every medication that was ever trialed. And it was by a factor of 50. I mean, it was not a small margin on how much better this was. And so this is something that people are actually putting into practice now. And there are elderly care facilities that are implementing ketogenic diets or ketogenic carnivore diets even. And some of them are they're improving their patients' quality of life. Obviously, that's the most important thing. Some of them are getting so well that they're actually being able to be discharged home to their family. There's end stage nursing homes. And there's a gentleman in Phoenix actually doing this right now, Hal Cranmer. I had him on my podcast. He's very, very interesting what he's doing. And now he's getting a reputation for this. So now people are bringing their parents to him in order to try to get them better as opposed to just giving up on them, which is quite remarkable. There are other benefits as well. NAD is sort of a hot ticket item at the moment. People talk about this from a longevity perspective. As we get older, NAD starts getting lower and lower and lower in our bodies and in our cells. And this has many, many functions in our body. And we think of that as the sort of causing age-related changes and a slowing of our energy production and making less ATP. Obviously, making less ATP in the brain is going to slow down cognition. But when you're running on ketones require one NAD plus to make two acetyl-CoA molecules, and that can go through the Krebs cycle and make ATP. But glucose requires 4 NAD plus to make the same two acetyl-CoA molecules. So you're using 1/4 of the NAD. So it's much more efficient. You're getting much more energy, and you're not going to hit a bottleneck if you have low NAD. So yeah, those are, I think, probably some of the main points in that.
Amazing. Thank you for highlighting that, because you've sort of like, hey, there's mental clarity, you can function better. And then there is also progression of dementia, which is a very hot topic around, and a lot of research, as you know, going on. So interesting. And thanks for explaining that, Anthony. I want to just go on to another question just related to that, and that is, how is, do you think carnivore diet helpful for athletes, especially those who are very involved in a lot of sports or very active? How does it help compared to those who are on other sort of diets that are out there? And just an angle on, do touch on a little bit about the nutritional other deficiency that they talk about, or the aspects of that. We just want to touch on that and just explain to our audience, what do you think on that and what's your take?
Yeah. So especially for athletes, I think that this is extremely beneficial. I mean, even just bouncing back to the energy dynamics of our brain. Obviously, if your brain's working better, you can think more clearly, your nervous system is working better. And then the mitochondrial health is so important, and the energy production. So like from an NAD perspective, you're using 1/4 of the amount of NAD. Now, so you're getting better mitochondrial function as well. Studies have also shown that after about 3 months on a ketogenic diet, your cells will typically have about 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're about 4 times as effective because they're replacing out and recycling the old damaged mitochondria. So they're just getting more and more active and productive. So that's huge for energy production as an athlete. The other thing is as well is that you reduce inflammation, so you get less soreness, you have quicker recovery times, you can train more, and you can compete more. So beta hydroxybutyrate blocks the NLRP3 inflammasome, and this directly suppresses inflammation. You also have, this is from a longevity perspective as well, this actually protects against articular cartilage breakdown. We're seeing more and more studies when they analyze the material taken out from a knee scope or a reconstructed joint, or a discectomy, taking out the disc material out of a degenerative spine. They're actually finding that they're chock full of these advanced glycation end products, AGEs, that are from elevated blood sugar or periodic elevated blood sugar with spikes as you eat carbohydrates. That for people that don't know, glycation is a non-enzymatic fusion of carbohydrate molecules, typically glucose in this case, to other molecules, and it permanently damages them and causes destruction of those tissues. And this is what kills diabetics long term. This is all the complications of diabetes, such as kidney disease, diabetic retinopathy, losing the blood supply to your toes and feet and having to get amputations, etc., heart disease. This all comes from glycation, these AGEs. And we find these AGEs are replete in damaged cartilage and degenerative spines. And so from a longevity point of view, you're going to keep your joints longer. And as an athlete, that's, your body is your machine. That's what you need to achieve your goals. Some of the other, from a nutrition standpoint, it's basically crystal clear that this is a much bigger advantage to be in a state of ketosis. Let's take a 65 kilo elite athlete at 6% body fat percentage. So a very lean, strong athlete.
Sure. That
athlete can maximally, with maximal carb loading, can store about 2,400 kilocalories of energy as glycogen in the liver and the muscles. That's maximum. But in just that 6% body fat, in that 65 kilo individual, that 6% body fat is over 35,000 kilocalories of energy. And you don't have access to that if you are not in a state of ketosis. Ketosis is probably misnamed. You do get ketones, but that's not the defining feature. The defining feature is that you can run on your fat stores, and you can mobilize energy from your fat stores, and your insulin is down low enough so that these metabolic processes are available, because insulin is a very busy hormone, as you know. It doesn't just direct energy into cells. It also is important for hundreds of different physiological processes in your body, hence why you have other sort of physiological benefits, such as increase in number of mitochondria, et cetera, through autophagy. High insulin just blocks autophagy. So people say, well, you need to fast for 5 days to go through autophagy. No, you just need to stop eating carbs for 5 days and you'll start going through autophagy. So from an energy dynamic point of view, you get a massive benefit by being a ketogenic athlete, because now you're locked into your fat stores. Glycogen is an inefficient storage form of energy, and it's not supposed to be our primary storage form. It's a backup storage form. And the thought is that this doesn't work for high performance athletes, because after a 60% VO2 max, you switch to carbohydrate metabolism. So you want to stay in that, that zone 2 fat burning heart rate is where people talk about. That's where you're burning fat and oxidizing fat. That's only true if you're eating carbohydrates. And studies have been done with Dr. Volek and Finney and McSweeney, looking at top-level elite athletes, looking at their metabolism and their performance as a ketogenic athlete. And they're finding that as long as you're ketogenically adapted, meaning that you've been on a ketogenic diet for 3 months plus, they were outperforming the carbohydrate athletes. And interestingly enough, Volek found in his 2016 FASTER trial that the ketogenic athletes were still burning fat. They were going through fat oxidization over 90% VO2 max. And so throughout this 3-hour run that they had on a treadmill, they found that they actually 90% of the energy that their muscles consumed during that time was through fat oxidation. So the idea that you're only burning carbs after a certain point is not true. Interestingly enough, in that Volek trial, they actually did muscle biopsies before that 3-hour run and after, and then 3 hours after recovery. And they found that at all 3 points that the ketogenic athletes had the exact same or nearly exactly the same muscle glycogen levels as the carb athletes, even though carb athletes were taking sugar gels and packets and carbs and things like that, and the keto athletes were not. So that's a huge advantage as well. And then throughout these trials, when they're looking at Professor Noakes down in South Africa, as well as Volek, et cetera, when they're looking at these top athletes who are their carbohydrate cohort, these are world-class athletes. These are elite athletes. They're world-class ultramarathoners, Ironman competitors, et cetera.
Right.
The ones who were using all these carbohydrates to compete in their races, all of these people were pre-diabetic to diabetic. And so that as an athlete is untenable. You only have a very short half-life when you're damaging yourself metabolically to such an extent that you're giving yourself diabetes as a 28-year-old world-class athlete. So that's causing serious harm to your body. And so as an athlete, you're not getting better performance. We've seen that in the McSweeney trials. We've seen that in the Volek trials. We've seen that in the Noakes trials. And you are causing metabolic harm, and you don't have access to all this energy. So you have to keep sucking down sugar gels and junk like that. And you're damaging your body. So from an athletic perspective, I think it's unequivocal that it's advantageous to be in a ketogenic state, and especially in a carnivorous state, because then you've got all the other junk out of your body as well. And then if you don't have an upset gut and IBS and all these other sorts of things, you're going to be able to compete a lot better.
Excellent. Thank you for explaining that. That's a thorough answer. We're running out of time, and I know your time is valuable as well. Let me just get to know, or would you mind telling the audience about the upcoming book that you're involved in and writing about? We'd love to hear what's around the corner for us, and what is the message that you're going to try to convey from that book?
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm trying to make the argument that the so-called chronic diseases that we treat now as a mainstay in modern medicine are not diseases per se, but actually toxicities and malnutrition. I think it's largely environmental, and I think largely that environmental influence is from the food we're eating or not eating. So I think that these toxins and malnutrition come from a toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and a lack of species specific nutrition, namely too many things we're not adapted to eat, like plants, but also this processed food that no one's adapted to eating because it's only been created by humans in the last 100 years, and then not enough meat and fat, because we vilified fat unfairly and meat unfairly over the past 50 years. And I'm hopefully trying to undo that. So I'm making that argument, and I hope to make a strong case. And so that can be compelling enough that doctors and patients alike will look at this and say, okay, well, maybe we need to address this chronic disease issue slightly differently, because what we're doing now, just using medications to paper over the symptoms, isn't really working, because they're just getting worse and worse and worse as the decades go on. And obviously, if we want to actually help people and cure disease, I think that we need to look at it not as disease, but as toxicities and malnutrition.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That's excellent. Would have loved to talk more about a lot of other things. There's, weight reduction medications. There's still plant toxicity. I'm glad you mentioned some of that. Just on a final note, would you like to just convey your final message and any misconceptions you want to dispel, and something that you want to tell to your audience about the carnivore diet and stuff, and just in general, any other message?
Sure. Yeah. Well, just in general, the carnivore diet sounds quite outlandish, but just remember that this isn't something that's new and unholy. This is something that we've been eating. As we have very strong evidence, this is what humans have been eating naturally for a very long time. We have examples like the Maasai and the Nanette, the Inuit, et cetera, who are doing so right now and don't have these chronic diseases that we're facing right now as well. It's also, it sounds pretty crazy since the carnivore diet is something wild, but it it's not all that foreign if you think about it. It's a whole food diet approach. We're just cutting out junk food, cutting out garbage, and it's ketogenic. You want this to be in a ketogenic state, and that provides a lot of metabolic benefits by getting your insulin down. And then you're just looking at what's there to eat biologically for us. Well, we're more adapted to eating meat. There's nothing inherently harmful in meat that we need to stay away from. The cholesterol was the argument, but that's been roundly debunked. And there are objective toxins in plants that we know of, and we've categorized, classified, and named, and we've quantified the harm in a lot of these things as well. Even the WHO has an entire web page dedicated to the natural toxins found in foods, and those foods are all plant toxins, mushrooms, and algae. There isn't a single toxin on the WHO website that comes from meat. The closest one is the algae that gets into seafood, and then we eat that by proxy. So we know that these are toxic. We know that they can cause harm. Maybe you're eating it in such a small amount that you're not going to get a florid disease. Great. No amount of lead is safe. So, saying that, well, it's not that much lead in it, it's not really a good argument. Now, maybe some of these things aren't that big of an issue, but if you just ignore it completely, I think you're doing yourself a disservice, because you need to respect the fact that these plants are defending themselves this way. They will build up in your system. They can cause harm. And so this chronic, slow exposure will build up eventually. If you even smoke one cigarette a day, over decades, that will build up and you will have problems. And the same thing goes with these other toxins.
Excellent. Thanks for explaining that. Well, that's all the time we have for today, everyone. A huge thank to Dr. Anthony for sharing his valuable insight, valuable time. We truly appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very, very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And to our amazing audience, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Khan Klinics. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. Give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and feel free to drop your comments. We love hearing from you. Don't forget to spread the word, tell your friends. For now, have a good evening. Thank you.